Hello there! In previous videos, I unboxed and set up my new Jobo CPP-3 film and print processing machine. Since then, I've had the chance to use this machine to process black and white film, color film with process C41, and color prints with process RA4. In that time, I've learned a lot about using this machine and would like to share some of my experiences. A few of the things I'm going to share are clearly nitpicky setup items that you might be okay ignoring, and some of them may actually be useful information. The lift assembly is held in place by these two white screws that ship with washers. The instructions were quite confusing as to the specific order in which you insert these washers between the screw head, the lift, and the base of the machine. I originally believed that the washers were supposed to sit between the lift and the base. However, I think this made the lift arm just slightly unable to completely lower. After talking about this issue with another CPP-3 user and seeing photos of his setup, I'm now convinced that the washer goes right underneath the screw head, exactly where you would expect it to. I know this issue is silly nitpicking, but I wanted to do things right in the face of awkwardly written instructions. My lift shipped with two white transfer gears installed into the lift mechanism. The instructions for the older CPP-2 machine say that there should only be one transfer gear installed and that the second gear is only used when the lift is installed in an Autolab machine. Many of the Jobo product photos for the CPP-3 also only show a single transfer gear. Meanwhile, my attempt at searching for photos of other people's machines has shown both one and two transfer gears. After asking Cat Labs about this issue, I was told that Jobo has changed their mind on the subject and now specifies that two transfer gears should be installed on the CPP-3. On the back of the Jobo, there's a spigot intended for water overflow. It ships with a T-connector like this attached, where the bottom should go to the drain and the top should be left open as a drain vent. The position of this spigot is lower than it was on the CPP-2 based on updated EU product regulations about how far the water level inside of a machine must be kept from its mains power. Now, here's the part where I'm just going to outright say some things that people might disagree with and give what some would regard as bad advice. In fact, I would say that no one in any official capacity with regards to Jobo is ever going to admit any credibility in writing to what I'm saying for your typical CYA reasons. That being said, I don't personally believe that they actually changed the dimensional design of the CPP-3 when implementing this regulatory change. I think what they probably did was just move that overflow hole downward a few centimeters. As a result, the water level inside the machine is now possibly too low for it to properly regulate chemistry temperature. At best, you might be able to fill the water level high enough to cover bottles up to the 600 to 700 milliliter mark and just barely immerse the graduates. Meanwhile, the CPP-2 pretty much expected you to fill its trough right up to the neck of the bottles. Taking this into account, I went ahead and opened up my CPP-3 and took out a ruler. The new stock position of the overflow port basically limits the water level to around 12 to 13 centimeters. Meanwhile, the water level can actually go as high as 20 to 21 centimeters before it touches the bottom of the assembly containing the motor and electronics. I also saw some photos from someone who had fiddled with his overflow spigot and ended up with a water level of approximately 17 to 18 centimeters. He uses his machine all the time and has never had any problems with it. With all this in mind, I decided to go ahead and fabricate a solution. I designed a barbed hose adapter that kind of looks like an elbow joint fused to a T-connector. I then 3D printed it out of nylon and attached it to my overflow spigot. With it in place, the water level in the Jobo is now up to where it should be, and the overflow drain is still vented. I later went and got it professionally 3D printed out of a more watertight material just to make sure I'm not risking any drips on the back of the machine. Now the Jobo fills its lower trough right up to the 900 milliliter mark on the bottles. Of course, once the recirculation pump starts to fill the upper trough, you might still want to add another 6 liters of additional water to regain that level if it's important. Getting the Jobo's water bath up to temperature can take a while. If it takes too long, the Jobo will assume something is wrong, stop, and throw up an error code. If your tap water is too cold, like mine is this time of year, then this is actually quite likely to happen. My solution for this problem is to preheat a decent volume of water in a bucket using something like this Cinestill TCS 1000, or from a hot water tap in your house if you have one available, and then fill the Jobo from that bucket. I'll then top off the water bath and let the Jobo heat it the rest of the way to the processing temperature. Processing guidance for C41 specifies that the developer should be at 38 degrees Celsius, or technically 37.8 degrees Celsius with a small margin of error, with the other chemicals in a generous range around that temperature. To achieve this inside the processing tank, John Tinsley's The Rotary Processor Manual actually suggests setting the water bath at a higher temperature of 39.8 degrees Celsius. What I do now is to heat the water bath to 39.8 degrees Celsius, stick a thermometer into the developer bottle, and begin processing when that thermometer reads approximately 38 degrees Celsius. Keeping warm rinse water on hand is also useful. You can use the extra bottle slots in the Jobo to help with this if you're not doing E6 and don't need them. Or you can keep a separate bucket of warm water nearby. If you don't have a hot water supply in your darkroom, you can use something like the Cinestill TCS 1000 or any similar sous vide stick to help with this. Just be warned that those things use a lot of power, and it might cause electrical problems to run one at the same time as the Jobo's heater. For some reason, the graduates included with the Jobo only have markings up to 260 milliliters. To help with measuring chemicals for processing, I've added 270 milliliter marks and 170 milliliter marks, corresponding to the full and half capacities of a 2520 tank, to my cylinders. For rinse water, I have a series of plastic cups where I've marked the volume levels for various rinse water amounts as specified in Jobo's instructions. Since I'm somewhat afraid of what would happen if my Jobo suddenly lost power in the middle of a processing cycle, I've decided to run it off of a UPS. Now, this is a fairly ordinary run-of-the-mill Tripp-Lite 1500 VA unit that seems to mostly work all right. It does get a little temperamental if the voltage level in the room drops too much, so that is something I need to be aware of. And every once in a while, if I let the Jobo run its heater continuously for over an hour while it's heating up, it might wig out as well. However, it does seem to be getting the job done. And because it obviously has an illuminated display on the front, I've taped a light-tight plastic bag over it so that it doesn't cause any problems. Because my darkroom runs off of a single electrical circuit, and I'm using a UPS that gets temperamental in the face of voltage drops, and because voltage drops will cause the lights to flicker in an annoying way, I keep this kilowatt meter on the wall so that I can keep track of things while I'm processing in here. When everything is turned off, it measures approximately 121 volts in the room, which is good. When the Jobo is heating and at full power, the voltage drops to around 113 volts, which actually isn't too bad. However, if I run something like the TCS 1000 at the same time, the voltage drops to 106 volts or less, and if I'm running a hairdryer for drying prints, it may drop even further, which greatly annoys the UPS and causes a lot of light flickering. Therefore, I need to be careful and mindful of this while I'm doing things in the darkroom. Since I use the automatic process timer in my Jobo, I wanted to have an easy way of keeping track of its settings. The machine ships with a sheet like this that describes all of the settings that are pre-programmed into the machine. However, there's really no good place to fill in your own details, and the print is actually kind of small. So I took all the information and copied it into a spreadsheet and made my own version of the same document. What this allows me to do, however, is have enough space to scribble my own notes and process details. This has been especially useful for processes that I need to fill in almost entirely myself, since it gives me a reference that I can tack above the machine while I'm using it to know what it's going to do next. I do make an effort to keep these papers in sync with what is programmed into the machine, so that I am never surprised by what's going on. It took me a while to figure out the specific behavior of the start button and the motor when using the automatic process timer. Basically, it works like this. If the motor is not running, then pressing start will start the motor. If the motor is running, then start will stop the motor if and only if the Jobo thinks you're supposed to lift, drain, or remove the tank. In any other state, the start button will do something weird but recoverable on the screen, such as asking if you want to skip or cancel a process step. At the beginning of the processing cycle, after you fill the chemistry, pressing start will cause the motor to start turning. During a chemical step, press start to start the motor after filling. At the end of the step, once the timer has elapsed, and not a moment earlier, pressing start will stop the motor. Since chemical times are specified assuming that you start draining 10 seconds before the timer elapses, managing this can sometimes require 3 hands. There's one hand to make sure the drain bottle stays in place, one hand to operate the lift, and then one hand to press the start button while all these things are held in place. Since the timing is really only critical for developers, I don't bother with this dance for anything past the first chemical of my processes. During a wash step, pressing start will stop the motor only when the message "replace water" is displayed on the screen. After dumping and refilling the water, pressing start will cause the motor to start again. Since the timer never stops during a wash cycle, you do need to be quite quick in how you manage all of this. Another important tip for wash cycles on the Jobo CPP-3 is that it assumes you are going to replace water every 45 seconds. So when you look at your process guide and it tells you how many water exchanges that you need to do, I recommend taking that number, multiplying it by 45 seconds, and using that for the wash you program in. This is important to note because most process guides and most older Jobo-oriented guides are written with the assumption that a wash cycle is going to be 30 seconds long and not 45. So far, I've processed several rolls of black and white and color film with the machine and completed several color printing sessions. Overall, I've been quite happy with the results. With color, I decided to start by running a C41 process control strip through the machine. These are special test strips that let you evaluate your processing flow in a controlled manner. I started experimenting with these several months ago as a way to gain confidence as I gradually ran through the chemistry from my Fuji C41 Express kit. Originally, I was doing a visual evaluation of the strips as a basic sanity check. However, I've since acquired a densitometer that has allowed me to actually track the numbers. Suffice it to say, the Jobo processed strip is actually much closer to the reference than any of my inversion tank processing attempts, despite the fact that it has actually been over 6 months since I originally mixed that batch of chemistry. The numbers I've gotten are so close to the reference that they might as well be considered within the margin of error of the densitometer. I've also included a link to a video that provides some good advice about how to treat a Jobo correctly and not accidentally break it while it's running. Now, this advice does suggest that you don't raise or lower the lift while the motor is running. Guidance from Cat Labs and from some friends actually says that it's okay to raise and lower while it's running. My own personal experience makes me a little wary of lowering the lift while the motor is running, but raising it seems to be perfectly okay. So there you have it. These have been my initial experiences using the Jobo CPP-3 film and print processor in my darkroom. Overall, I've been quite happy with the machine, and most of the issues that I've run into have been things that could very easily be addressed with improved documentation, or are things specific to my setup. In any case, I will include links in the description to most of the materials that I've discussed today. Please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you later. Bye.